Time for grammar. Part 2 of grammar quotes. Last week we learned all about when we would use quotes around a quotation mark used in dialogue, specific words we wanted to highlight, titles of short pieces like short stories and songs and poems. Today we're going to focus a little more on the punctuation that goes around those quotes. Make sure your handout's in front of you and let's start filling in. Rule number 3.5 tells us to use a comma before the quotation mark when a word before it signals someone said something. Example signal words are things like said, noted, exclaimed, questioned, shouted, asked. And it's important to know that the signal word doesn't always have to happen exactly before the quote. So sometimes there might be something like, he asked a question to the class about when did that history event happen. And you can notice that our signal word is here, that he asked. And we could even take out all of this part here. But we have he asked. There's our signal word. So I would actually need a comma there. An example, she said, comma, I have nothing more to say. He exclaimed, comma, this is awesome. I'll pause now while you try your best at inserting the needed punctuation on these two. Okay, moving on. Rule 3.6. If you interrupt a sentence, we're going to use a comma both within the end of the first quote and before the opening of the second part. So you may have heard me say this, yes, you must copy the examples, but if I want to emphasize in between that I sighed deeply, you would say yes, comma, close quote, said Mrs. Derby with a sigh, comma, open quote. You must copy the examples. So if we interrupt a sentence, a quoted sentence like this, we're going to use a comma at the end of the first part of the quote and before the beginning of the second part of the quote. Now it's important to see that this is one full sentence here. It's different if we have two different quotes, a sentence here and then a full sentence here. We're going to see that that's a little different. Insert the needed punctuation here. Give it a try. All right, rule 3.7, we're already halfway done. Don't use a comma when the quote is in the flow of the sentence. Now this is the opposite of having that signal word that we talked about in rule 3.5. If there is no signal word and the quote just becomes part of the sentence, but we still want to stress that someone else said a part of it, we won't use a comma. An example is, he once told me I was, quote, the best student he ever had, period, quote. She told me to get, quote, 4 French hens, end quote. Now it's important to see that we have this idea that he told me something here, but we want to signal that it goes right in this sentence. I was the best student he had ever had. Get 4 French hens. So our more important verb going on in here is this was or get. Try it again. Insert the needed punctuation. And last but not least, rule 3.8. Use a colon when the words before the quote are a full sentence all on their own, and then what's in the quote is a full sentence as well. She made the same comment again. If I were to perhaps cover up this part of the statement This is a perfectly good sentence all on its own. She made the same comment again. I could put a period there, and it's actually a full and complete sentence. But because I want to continue this thought with what exactly her comment was, I use that colon and that open quotes, no comment. We're going to see a little bit later what this colon does. The colon generally is a nice signal that tells us this idea. It can almost stand in for the words, and it was. It's like we want to say, we want to really stress it. So a colon makes that part. She made the same comment again, and that comment was no comment. That colon kind of takes the place of that. Again, we'll be looking at colons a little bit later in a future grammar lesson. But try the end of this grammar too for quotes and check this needed punctuation. Once you are all set, you can either work on the mixed practice that's on the back of your paper and check it against the solution station up at the front of the room, or you can move right on to Grammar Quotes Part 3, continuing on with your notes before you do all of your practice at once. Thanks, friends.